Okay, everybody, it is time to begin, noon in the Eastern Time Zone of the United States and on the campus of Capital Technology University. I'm Bill Gibbs. I'm the host for this session today. It's just a tremendous pleasure to have each of you join us. As with always, we have a number of people who will continue to join us, but we want to get started. We'll be together for just about 1 hour this afternoon. Now, with that, let me tell you what we'll be doing. Today's presentation is by Dewayne Hart, and it is Cybersecurity Leadership Starts Long Before an Attack. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Here's the agenda that we're going to be following. We're going to talk a little tiny bit about capital and then some housekeeping. Then Kimberly Mansell will introduce the Center for Women in Cyber and also introduce the presenter. And then we'll hear our presentation from Dewayne Hart, have time for questions and answers. And then I'll talk about our upcoming webinars through the spring, how to get a copy of the recording slides and a certificate of participation. When I look at the attendees and who is here today as participants, I recognize some of you, such as Charles Vergers, have been here so much longer than I have, and you could tell me many a story about Capital, but there may be a couple people in the audience today that are not that familiar with our university. We're Capital Technology University. We've been around for a long, long time, and this decade we'll celebrate our 100th anniversary. We're based in Laurel, Maryland, just right outside of Washington, D.C. We're one of the few private universities in the entire United States that is specifically dedicated to STEM-based academic programs, things such as engineering, cybersecurity, and many other technical fields. The university is fully accredited and offers regionally accredited degrees all the way from the associates up to the doctoral levels, and degrees in the field that we're talking about today as well. Now, here's some little bit of housekeeping. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but you can actually type them in at any time into the text chat. We're not activating webcams or microphones for you, but you can type your question or comment into the text chat. We'll circle back at the end of the presentation and pick up as many as we can. I'll be sending a link to the recording and to the slides to everyone who's registered for this session, and also the recording will be available on our webinar webpage next week. A participation certificate is available by request, and I'll explain how to get one at the end of the presentation. Now, with that, I want to give control over to Kimberly Mansell, who is with the Department of Commerce in the state of Maryland and a member of our Center for Women in Cyber, who will introduce the center and the Cyber Leadership Series and introduce our presenter.
Well, thank you,
Kimberly, take
Bill.
it away.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Again, my name is Kimberly Mansell, and I do have the pleasure of discussing the Center for Women in Cybersecurity briefly before we move on to our fantastic presenter today. Capital Technology University's Center for Women in Cyber, we refer to it as CWC, is focused on empowering women of all ages to pursue careers in cyber. We, the center, seek to address the growing need for women professionals and leaders in cyber-related fields. The technology field's gender gap has been a persistent challenge. I could actually probably say a workforce challenge overall, but definitely for women. The CWC then encourages women to seek opportunities in the important and developing field of cybersecurity so their contributions can be embraced. Women leaders are unmatched in terms of creativity, perspective, and collaboration. The CWC provides the resources, direction, and positive support needed for success in achieving professional and educational goals through presentations, hands-on activities, partnerships, and mentoring. And yes, we do all of those things. The CWC is passionate in its quest to develop the next generation of diverse cyber leaders. And with that, I'd like to move on to our introduction to present our wonderful presenter. So the series today is titled Cybersecurity Leadership Starts Long Before an Attack. It is presented by Dewayne Hart, who has this fantastic experience in speaking as a podcaster. If I could move on to the next slide so you can see all of his or some of his accomplishments. I'm sure there are many. Dewayne Hart is a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Navy and owner of CMACE, a cybersecurity consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. And prior to this, we did have a discussion. It is apparently very chilly in Atlanta, Georgia, but I don't know if it's quite as chilly as here in Maryland today. But we'll see. But we understand. Okay, you're from the South. We understand. But I also like to take a moment and thank you, Dwayne, for your service as a Navy veteran, because we truly appreciate that in the United States. Um, Also, he hosts the Chief of Cybersecurity YouTube channel, which provides a wide range of content covering various cybersecurity topics for the cybersecurity workforce. Very timely. Thank you. He is also the author of The Cybersecurity Mindset, a Virtual and Transformational Thinking Mode. In addition, he is a member of the Forbes Tech Council, where he writes feature cybersecurity articles. I don't know where he finds this time, so I'm grateful he's here with us today. Hart holds a Master of Science in Information Assurance and a Master of Science in Cybersecurity and Information Assurance from the University of Maryland, so our state right here. Thank you. Additionally, he holds multiple certifications, including the CISSP, CEH, CGRC, CNDA, and apparently many, many more. With that, I would love to welcome Dewayne Hart to today's series. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay,
well, I'm
go ahead.
good.
I was going to say, thank you, Kim. There'll be a transition when we move over from my slides to his. So I'm sorry to interject. So go take it away, Mr. Hart.
Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's going to be fun. And also, too, I like to point out to everyone is that cybersecurity is kind of the way I envision, and I think it's very and very intriguing. But also, too, there are some complications with cybersecurity. So prior to me even coming here to present the webinar, I was thinking for a second. I said to myself, now, what is it that I can talk about? So in cybersecurity, I'm always focused on those things that matter most to people. I think that leadership is one of those things that make us very strong. While I was in the military, I taught leadership for my last 3 years. So now I'm taking cybersecurity leadership and bringing in some of those same type of talking points, but to put the cybersecurity spin on what leadership means. And I'm equally excited to talk about cybersecurity leadership because if you're involved with cybersecurity or if you are a regular professional, your job is to stay safe. So, we all are leaders in some capacity, but let's find ways to stay safe. And that's what I want to do today. Make sure everybody stays safe. All right. So I'm ready to execute here. So we're ready to take leadership to the next level. And so, right.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here.
While you're doing that, let me note the transcript is very broad. It's not quite saying what he is saying. So,
Okay.
okay, there
then.
we go. We see your Firefox.
Okay. All right then. So you see my screen here now?
I do.
Okay. Okay. And you tell me if you can see my PowerPoint slides. You see my PowerPoint slide?
Not yet.
Not yet on the PowerPoint slide. Okay then. Okay. I am going to hold on for a minute. I'm sorry about this right here. I'm gonna do that, and I don't know what happened right there. And I'm gonna go with the share screen. It's working.
Oh, you're
Okay,
getting it.
there we go.
There you go.
I'm
Perfect.
sorry about
Okay.
that.
Alrighty.
All righty then. We're on target here now, and I'm going to go ahead and I get started here to actually talk about cybersecurity leadership. So like much of the information had already been talked about, concerning the topic itself. Uh, but likewise, I said before, I find cybersecurity to be very intriguing. And if you are involved with the capacity of cybersecurity leadership, your main focus is to make sure that you can keep the environment protected. Now, that is a statement, but there comes a lot of work behind the process of keeping those environments safe. So for today, I am going to bring in the cybersecurity leadership perspective, but also too, I just want to reach on my background here just a little bit more. Writing is what I do with Forbes, but also too at the same time, I do have a company, and the company just goes and it procures contracts from the government. And now I'm going to share a secret with y'all that I'm working on my second book, and the second book is on cybersecurity leadership. Can you imagine that? Cybersecurity leadership, and you all are getting a first glimpse of the book itself. So I want to start off by talking about cybersecurity leadership, but let's just talk about the current environment. Everyone is very tuned into AI. AI has now changed the way that we operate. And leadership is challenged to make sure that AI operates efficiently, but at the same time to find use of AI. I went out and I did a survey, and there's a website called Webform. And on that particular website, there was a survey that went out to global cybersecurity leaders asking questions such as what is it that you are most afraid of when it comes to the emerging technologies? And all of the leaders went straight forth and said AI. And why is it that leaders are so concerned about AI? It's because attackers are using AI. And also, too, at the same time, AI is moving very fast and it's transitioning the way that we approach technology. I I believe that AI is a great thing, but we need to have some type of limitations in the design, because if we don't, we're going to be chasing cybersecurity and trying to make sure that we stay ahead of the ball game because that's our job. But at the same time, what this survey does, it tells us that leadership is concerned about AI. And that's important if you are involved into the area of technology. But also, too, I want to take time here is to just give a practical definition on what is cybersecurity leadership. I could sit here and uh, give you a standard blurb, but really, if you look at this practical definition of cybersecurity leadership, what it tells us is that you have to be proactive. You have to be a decision maker, and you have to be committed to defending enterprise because cyber threats are growing every day. If you think about the news, if you think about the web, if you think about some of the things that probably happen to your friends, and there are cyber threats that are just causing harm. But at the same time, how can we be effective? And this is where leadership comes in, because leadership has to drive the vision. But what happens with leadership is that leadership now is working in very high up tempo environments because leaderships have to make sure that they satisfy the business, but also to make sure that the end users are safe. So as we go through this training section here, you're going to see some of the things that leadership can do to be effective, but also too, how do we maintain a safe environment so that we can beat hackers to the finish line? Because that's our job, is to beat hackers to the finish line. Now, there are certain questions that leaders have to ask themselves. And these questions goes directly into their environment because leaders have to be faced with cybersecurity risks. I know for a fact that when a cybersecurity leader first come on board, they are always anxious and they are trying to find out one thing. What is my job? Where's the environment most susceptible to risk? And if a cybersecurity leader could go through these questions here, this is where they find out exactly what needs to get done. Because before an attack, a cybersecurity leader has to be communicating to the boardroom, and a cybersecurity leader has to have that hacker's mindset. When I wrote the cybersecurity mindset, that was one of the topics that I focus on. Is that how can readers understand how to have a hacker's mindset? Because if you have a hacker's mindset, you now understand how to channel cybersecurity. And part of these 6 questions here, it can be really be focused upon cybersecurity leadership because your job is to know your environment. So in order to understand your environment, you're going to have to understand your business assets. You have to understand risk. And also, too, you have to understand your cybersecurity capabilities, which later on I am going to discuss. So these are questions that cybersecurity leaders should be asking themselves because these are guiding them through their jobs on a daily basis, and it follows them throughout their entire career. So, in order to be successful with cybersecurity leadership, I decided to draft up a model because I love drafting models. One of the things that I think about too is that as a cybersecurity leader, what type of mindset should you have? So let's put this into perspective for a second. Your job is to be a business champion because you have to sell cybersecurity to the board. And you also a risk manager because you have to protect the enterprise. You are strategizing both of these concepts so that you can operate cybersecurity and make it work efficiently. Most people come from the technical side, and as they build their careers, they are often faced with challenges. And one of those challenges is transitioning your technical background to the business level. And as a cybersecurity leader, this is where everything is most important. Let's just take a classic case. Let's just say, for instance, you are a cybersecurity leader and you need $20 million to actually modernize your cybersecurity program. Well, when you go to the boardroom, there are going to be questions that are going to be asked to you. What is the state of the enterprise? Where are we most vulnerable? And all of those goes back to the 6 questions that we just went through, because you have to know your enterprise. Because the board members are there depending on you to provide them with the technical answers, and the board is concerned about their customers. Or if you work in the government space, you are pretty much very concerned about the government or clients. So, as a cybersecurity leader, this is your mindset because you have to strategize. One side is being a business champion, and the other side is being a risk manager. If you gain time later on today, if you go to my website, www.dewayneHart.com, there are some podcasts that talk about cybersecurity leadership and being a risk manager, and also to a business champion. So as you move through, there are some key leadership things that would keep you in the front line. And I always talk about the front line because cybersecurity leadership has to operate from the front line. If you operate from the front line, then you are proactive in what you do. Of course, if you're at the back of the line, then you become reactive. So let's talk about this topic for a bit because this is very important. Because if you're proactive, so that means that you can reduce those cyber attacks. So that means that you can beat hackers to the finish line because that's your job as a cybersecurity leader. But part of that process is how do you strategize in being proactive? As you can see here, there are some standards and protocols that you have to follow. Uh, and also, too, you have to have the latest and the greatest of technologies because as of now, we are transitioning into an environment where AI is changing the landscape. We cannot remove ourselves away from AI. There's a new trend called the AI SOC environments that are growing. And the AI SOC is supposed to streamline the way that we manage data, and it's supposed to accelerate information so that cyber defenders can now have one monitor versus 6 monitors and try to figure out where is the environment most vulnerable. And so you as a leader, you always have to think, okay, do I have the best technologies? Because if you don't, this goes back to being a business champion, because you have to sell that pitch to the board now and let the board know that you need that $20 million budget. Of course, you can be reactive and wait until a cyber attack and then go to the board and say you need $20 million, but that's going to fail. So what you have to do is strategize ways to avoid cyber attacks. And if you do that, you would be ahead of the line. Of course, if it's not happening, then you have to respond to risk. So just keep that in perspective about cybersecurity leadership. Stand proactive. You don't want to be reactive, because that creates a lot of strain and it creates a lot of stress. Okay, now there are some tools available on the market and some programs to help cybersecurity leadership stay ahead of hackers. NIST is very great at providing information. So I decided to take the NIST cybersecurity framework for a second. If you look at the 5 stages here, and if you can find ways to take people, process, and procedures and to inject them into these 5 stages, this is where you become successful as a leader. Now, I always like to look at the 3rd section, which is on detection here. See, with detection, so that means that you have been proactive. So that also means that you have found ways to discover your vulnerable instances and your risk before hackers do. And if you can operate these 5 stages here, this is going to help you gain picture on where you really stand with cybersecurity leadership, but at the same time, where is your environment most vulnerable? And as I said before, you always have to think about people, process, and procedures and strategize that into a working model. As I have been out speaking, and I was in Canada, and I was doing a speaking panel, and it was on AI in the modern warfare. And this is about the government and the military now is starting to incorporate AI into its weapon systems. So as I was having a discussion, that was one of the persons in the audience asked me, how can we really make AI work with military systems? I said that the first thing we actually have to do is that we have to look at the way that we design those systems. Because if we design them appropriately, then that's when we can detect issues. But imagine if we design systems falsely, or per se, if we design systems that are inadequate. So that means it deters our ability to detect cybersecurity incidents, intrusions, and to predict incidents. So I always like to say that with leadership, make sure that you embrace your ways of trying to detect your cybersecurity issues. If you look at the recovery side, this is about operational resilience. Can you bounce back? Can you sustain operations even through a cyber attack? And if you are a college student, this is a perfect model to use for your papers. If you go out there and study the NIST cybersecurity framework, it definitely is a guiding principle that's going to help you understand how cybersecurity should operate, and some of the things that you have to do to make sure that our cybersecurity is sustainable. And that's our primary job when we take people, process, and procedures and inject them into the NIST cybersecurity framework. So, as I said before, one of the things that we all have to do, especially in the world of cybersecurity, is to think about your environment. If you go back to the 6 questions, that's about the environment. All too often, cybersecurity leadership has to face issues with a sinking rock, is what I call it, because there are things that you see and there are things that you don't see. Let's just take it. Let's just take one of these for example. Let's just think about if you work in an IT enterprise, most of the leadership has to walk into the boardroom and give reports on a monthly basis. And these reports supposed to represent metrics and numbers. And the boardroom may just state, hey, we want to have a 90% benchmark score every month. And so what happens is that by some reason of bad communication, some of the cybersecurity defenders decide to take the printers off of the report, and because your score was a 75%, but now it's 90%. Let's just be honest for a second. Are we safe? Because the printers are still vulnerable, but the reports show that they're 90%. And this happens all too often with many enterprises. And see, this is why it's very important if you are involved with leadership to know your environment. Let's just go even further. About 3 or 4 years ago, the city of Atlanta's airport here faced a shutdown for 3 days. And, the shutdown happened because they did not have any redundancy in place. But what happened was that the airport was working at 99% of the time. So that means that when their primary system went offline, the backup system was supposed to take over, but there was no system redundancy. And see, this is important for leadership here, is to try to understand your environment because there's things that you see and there are things that you don't see. So, in order for leadership to be successful, there are some factors. One of the first factors I will go and talk about is that you have to build a cybersecurity culture. So let's deep dive into this for a second. A cybersecurity culture is about having the right people and the right technologies and the right security makeup. When you can take all three of those and you combine them together, you can build that award-winning cybersecurity culture. So what happens is that in a cybersecurity culture, people always serve as your weakest link. And this is one of the standard conversation in the world of cybersecurity. Why is people serve as the weakest link? Because people have options. They can either follow protocols or they can do wrong. So what you have to do is to build that culture where you have the right people. And the way that you build the right people is that you have a buy-in structure. When I wrote the cybersecurity mindset in chapter 1, I talk about the buy-in structure. I talk about having a strong cybersecurity culture. See, that culture is supposed to have a makeup that actually matches the organizations. And as you can see, there are certain type of solutions you can have to build your cybersecurity culture. If you think about now, most of us go through cybersecurity awareness course maybe every October. Well, guess what? I actually wrote an article, especially about a couple months ago, and I state that we need to take cybersecurity awareness to the next level. Let's talk about cybersecurity activation. So that means that all your knowledge that you have in the cybersecurity awareness course, let's talk about how you're supposed to put it into practice now. And this is the type of culture we actually have to have in the future here. One of the other things we need to do is to think about people in the workforce, right? Because people have to get trained. See, we have to have a way that people can learn the cybersecurity skills so that they can have a buy-in. First stage of a leadership, if you want to be successful, you have to build that cybersecurity culture. The second area is you have to drive cybersecurity visibility. Visibility is about, do you see everything on your enterprise? Let's just take a common person that is driving down the highway. And if you look at their mirror on the left side, they do not see the oncoming traffic. And see now, that's called their blind spots. So in cybersecurity, we still have blind spots. Blind spots are those areas that are not visible. And those are the places that organizations don't know about. It can be easy as a user goes out and get a laptop and bring it into the environment and plug it into the network. Well, as a leader, this is something that's very important for you because you can detect issues if you have a strong cyber visibility program. So if we go back to the NIST model we saw earlier here, if you think about detection, this is very important because the only way that you're going to detect how vulnerable you are, you're going to have some form of visibility. Part of your visibility is making sure you have a strong culture. Hey, that $20 million that you were trying to get from the board? Well, guess what? That is your investment strategy. And innovation is very important. And now with AI coming on board, like you need some tools on board that are going to help you out. And see, you have to modernize your enterprise because if you're able to achieve cyber visibility, operational resilience would be great. Now, operational resilience means that you can adapt to change. If you think about the rock that I just showed, what you don't see, and when there's a loss of redundancy, well, guess what? There is no resilience in place. So operational resilience is very important. Make sure that you got the right tools. Make sure that you inventory your tools. Make sure you set up programs to constantly talk to your team members about cyber visibility, because that's at most important, because that lets you see exactly your footprint, all your risk, all your vulnerabilities on your enterprise. Because the board and the executive staff is pretty much going to ask you questions about your environment. And if you can't answer the questions, then that's where you lose influence. So let's talk about the fact now that if you're a cybersecurity leader and you need to make great decisions. So in order for you to make great decisions, our friend has to come back, which is understanding the environment. It is very important to understand that environment, because you have to make decisions about how to carry cybersecurity forward, because you have to make decisions about modernizing your enterprise. One of the things that's going to help you out is that you have to understand your cybersecurity capabilities. That is very important. In fact, there's a Forbes article that I just posted on LinkedIn today, which talks about understanding your cybersecurity capabilities, because your capabilities tells you what you can and cannot achieve when it comes to cybersecurity. Some of the things you can do too is think about where your weaknesses are, which tools are working properly. Think about your workforce. Do you have a capable workforce? Do you have a team that's trained? Do you have a team that has the certifications that they need? I've always stated that in order to be a strong leader, you always have to have strong people, and your people works under your capabilities. And you have to make sure that you have very strong people that wants to be on your team. Some of the other things that you have to try to remember too is that you have to constantly assess your capabilities. This can be formal, where you decide to have a team meeting, or it can be informal by just watching your team and making sure you understand your capabilities. Because when a cyber attack happens, you want to be able to defend the enterprise. Because if you don't have the appropriate capabilities, then uh, you're going to lose when the cyber attack happens. And that's not good on leadership, because the boardroom has $20 million on the table, but you have to convince the boardroom that they should give you that $20 million for your enterprise. And this takes us into a success factor here that is most important as well. You have to sell cybersecurity to management. This is where you put your leadership to work. If you think about everything that I've discussed so far, when it comes to walking into the boardroom and that $20 million budget, the board members have questions for you. And one of those questions can be, can you at least and somehow tell me that we're not going to have a cyber attack? Now, that's a hard question to answer, because you can't predict the future. But if you have influence in the boardroom, if you know how to speak their language, and you have great data, such as your metrics and so forth, then you can sell cybersecurity to management. Because this is part of being a business champion, is understanding business, because your whole premise is to build a defensive program that operates, and where the board can trust you, and all of the executive leaders can trust you as well too. And see, it makes it easy for you. And some of the things you can do is that, well, you have to speak business terms, and you have to speak their language, and try to communicate early and often. Maybe you can go out to lunch with some of the board members so they can understand, the way that you operate, and you can understand the mindset of the board members. And because I would say it again, but this is probably one of the most important areas outside of trying to detect where you're most vulnerable, because you have to sell cybersecurity to management. And there are some key things that I discussed that you have to do. And if you stay close to understanding your environment and the 6 questions that I spoke about as well, and also too making sure that you understand that cybersecurity is always changing. And so as a leader, you will always have to change as well too. So so there's something else I want to bring up here. And this is very important, is that the narrative for cybersecurity leadership needs to be reframed. Here's why. Cybersecurity is somewhat seen as a problem, not a solution. So we have to transition that concept and reframe it so that the community knows that cybersecurity is a business organization risk. And cybersecurity job is to not be a roadblock, but to secure products. If you think about now, most of the environments always require you to have multi-factor authentication. And there are users that don't like logging in 3, maybe 4 times to a system. So they think it's a roadblock. But but that needs to be reframed and to let users know this is in place to secure you. Because if you have multiple ways to authenticate, multiple ways to defend the enterprise, then you can stay safer. But see, the misconception is that cybersecurity is a roadblock, right? And it's slowing us down because users want access to information. Users want access to information very fast. If you think about the data breaches that have happened over the past, the the CISO always and always and always serves as the gatekeeper. Now, the gatekeeper is that number one person that is going to have to walk into the boardroom and to have a discussion with the board members when there's a cyber attack. Because the role of the CISO is to be a risk manager from the technical side. So as we go back through the models that I had before, this is the risk manager job, right? Is to understand the technologies. And I always believe that we need to reframe the way we look at cybersecurity leadership, because if we can reframe cybersecurity leadership, and if we can change the misconception, that's when it makes it easier to carry out security and to make sure that all our environments are very safe. If you look at the industry now, there are some changes in the cybersecurity leadership realm. Some of those changes are happening that where you have organizations now are saying, okay, how much work should we point toward leadership and CISOs? Should we separate the work and just make cybersecurity leaders business only people, and then just have technical individuals as well? I think that concept sounds good, but still, when it comes to leadership, like you have to have a business side, and also too, where you have to have a technical side. When you know how to strategize both of those together, that's when you become very successful. So what we need to focus on is changing the narrative around, and so that we can set leaders up for success. All right. So I am open now for questions. Um, if there's any questions that need to be asked, you can definitely go and ask those questions. But also too, prior to me getting that to the question, I want to show you one one slide. If it's anybody that likes to read, and I mean like you just love to read, I have 24 articles that I've written on AI, cybersecurity leadership, the workforce, and so forth. You can go and read my articles, and you can get some in-depth information on things to do, ways to go carry out leadership, and so forth. All right. So likewise, I'm going to open up the session for questions now.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there's any questions that are there. Again, type your question into the text chat, and we'll give a moment for people to do that. and then we'll go from there. And let me open it up a little bit as well. Many of you in the on the call are in the roles that Dewayne Hart has just mentioned, where you are in positions of leadership. And so you may want to share your own comments there about your own experiences as well. So it may not be a question, it may just be a comment or an observation. So let's give a moment to see if anyone has any questions.
Oh yeah. Okay. Also too.
Okay, I have a question from Renee that showed up in the Q&A section. It says, how do you manage vendors knowing that vendor cybersecurity is not under your control? Excellent question.
Okay. Vendors. Okay. This goes back to a lot of vendors. Yes, they're not under your control, but you have different programs. If you are a leader where you set up different types of agreements, because one of the problem with the vendors is that vendors operate cybersecurity differently from like your company. So what you have to do is that prior to uh, trying to engage vendors, that you do have some type of communication line, and if you can actually try to obtain information on the way that they manage their cybersecurity programs, that's going to help out, because one of the problems that I've seen in the past is that there's been a lot of cyber attacks that happen, and with some of those attacks happen because vendors are not following certain protocols. So what you have to do is to have a watchful eye and make sure prior to engaging vendors that the vendors understand your cybersecurity roadmap and those things that you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Anna asks, what advice would you give to a college student interning in cybersecurity?
Oh, okay then. Intern, here goes. I'm gonna make it really short, but also at the end, I'm gonna say that I have 4 podcasts that were put out on the same topic. If you are an intern, what you're trying to do is to learn cybersecurity. But also too, I'm going to focus on how do you get to the process of being an intern. One of the things that happens with junior personnel when they're trying to enter the cybersecurity workforce, see, they have to make sure that they fulfill the triangle. So, the triangle is your certification, educations, and also your experience. Most people are having a challenge at trying to get the experience. So what I always like to say is that if you're an intern, and if you are working on a job, go out there and take one of these certifications and look at all of the objectives, and see if you can go through those objectives on the job. CompTIA has a lot of information for you as well, but also too, as an intern, go to conferences, go to events where you learn about cybersecurity, and make sure that you stay active in this area of cybersecurity. And you can just go to lunch sessions with certain people and to go and learn. But at the same time, make sure that you are learning as much as possible while you are working as an intern. Ask questions and ask questions, because there is no crazy question when it comes to cybersecurity, because you're going to be put at the forefront of trying to trying to defend enterprises.
Okay, there's a question that's both there's a question in the chat, and there's also a question in the Q&A. Let me take the chat question first from Aslak. It says, we see a strong preference toward young talent, but isn't the fact that the problem-solving mindset and experience in older people is a strong force in this area? An interesting comment, is it not?
Yeah, yes. That's a very, very interesting comment. I think that I think that most of the companies that are hiring are really, really looking at people that are innovative. One of the things too is the challenge comes from, because most of the younger generation are into gaming and social media, so they live that culture where where they're very techy. Now, now, if you are someone that is a seasoned person, and let's say for instance, you want to enter the cybersecurity realm, what you bring with cybersecurity is the passion of leadership, is the passion of managing, is the passion of understanding how to carry out work. Because as a junior person, they are mostly technical people that are so on the ground. So you still can be effective in the industry. You just have to find ways to market yourself based on the fact that you're a leader, based on the fact that you can manage teams, but also to make sure that you learn learn cybersecurity from the perspective of being a risk manager, but also too from the business side.
Thank you. From the Q&A, Pamela asks, where do you see the biggest growth in cybersecurity field of study, particularly in today's tech environment with AI? And what are your thoughts on quantum computing and blockchain? This seems to be talked about a lot.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna say this. I just did a speaking engagement about 3 months ago on this topic of AI and cybersecurity and the workforce and where we're headed. We are now entering an area where AI and cybersecurity are becoming best friends. So that means that they cannot survive without each other. Um, there's a growing trend of new jobs that are populating. If you go to Indeed or like any of the job portals, if you type in the word AI, and you will see something like AI engineering, AI and cybersecurity manager. So for the individuals that are transitioning in now, focus on AI and also cybersecurity. There are going to be roles populating for some data scientists, research engineers, and also too for some cyber psychologists. Now, I want to bring that term up because as a cyber psychologist, you're going to have to study the behavioral patterns of humans, because when you start to ingest AI into all of the IT system, AI is based on individuals' behavioral patterns. So, so the technical or cyber psychologist is one of those roles that is populating in the future. Now, to go back to quantum quantum computing, it's gonna happen. I think that we are in a stage now where we need speed, where we need to process more information, and we need to be able to process more information, because if you notice that AI platforms now have to be able to process more information than regular systems. So if you think about having a quantum type of computer system that can process information at a very quick rate, it only aids AI, and AI aids cybersecurity. So what we're going to have in the future is all of those different platforms are going to be working and helping each other out to grow.
All right, we'll take one final question, and then I'm watching the clock, and I realize we're running out, close to the time here. Uh, Arnold asks this question: given the breadth of the cybersecurity field, how can educators effectively convey to university students the importance of carefully assessing their individual career goals and expectations within this domain?
Okay. Um, so so when it comes to trying to sell cybersecurity to students, I think the I think the main thing that I'm seeing from individuals is who is supposed to work in the cybersecurity industry. And I'm going to be honest about it. There was a discussion, and I think I saw it on LinkedIn, is that cybersecurity is a male driven industry, and all these conversations that go on. And me, I think that as a institutional teacher and learner, you know what? The best way to explain to students is that, the market trend, to tell them that the future is headed toward AI and cybersecurity. And, to show them that it's a growing market. Because if you could some way try to convey to them about 50 years ago when the computer revolution happened, many people were afraid to transition to that area. But as you can see now, we have so many jobs. So as AI and cybersecurity start to grow now, we're going to need people from a diverse background in the future. Part of that too is that for that question, there are some podcasts that I have that actually talked about that same topic there. And one of the things that is difficult is that certain people are very afraid to enter technology. Uh, Certain people want to be technical, and then others just kind of like the idea of working in technology. So I always state that learn, and also to make sure that make sure you do your homework. But for the professors and so forth, especially at colleges, maybe it's very important to kind of have a introduction to cybersecurity, and try to show students, the future of cybersecurity, because most of the introductory courses are kind of based on the technology industry itself. But let's just take it to the next level. Let's just show the benefit of it based on how you can aid citizens, and also too how you can sustain a job, because that's the most important thing here now is what can you do to have a job in the next 3 to 5 years, and going cybersecurity will go help out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you now to stop sharing your screen so I can resume sharing mine. And let's get this up here. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let me just say where we are. We're nearly done with the presentation today. I want to talk about our upcoming webinars, and then also talk about how to get a certificate of attendance. We have actually 4 webinars coming up in the next 4 months. Next month on February 20th, Dr. Ronald Martin will share on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development of artificial intelligence. Mr. Hart has shared a lot on AI today, and so this is a natural companion webinar to that. Then on March 20th, Dr. Sharon Burton will share the interconnectedness of cybersecurity leadership, change management, and business process improvement. A long title, but as you can see, a continuation of some of the same thoughts that Mr. Hart has shared today. Then I noticed on the next slide, I have a typo. It's actually April and May, not April and March. On April 17th, we'll hear from Aslak Movar, who will talk about the Nordic model of sustainability. Many people don't realize that we offer degrees in sustainability as part of our technical nature, and he will be sharing about what they do in Scandinavia and in Norway specifically. Then on May 20th, not March 20th, but May 20th, we'll hear from one of our faculty members, Jeff Volesen, who will be talking about space engineering. So with that, I want to just mention that to register for any of the webinars, you can go to our webinars page and secure your registration. All of these are free and complimentary. And I do want to mention that we also offer doctoral and master's information sessions if you are so inclined and want to pursue a degree related to the topic today. Finally, a copy of the slides and a link to the recording will be sent to everybody who's registered for the session. And a certificate of completion is available to all, including those who attend this live session and those who view it later on demand. All you really need to do is to simply reply to the email that I sent to you with the name that you want on the certificate. We'll be happy to do that for you. And again, the certificate is complimentary. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I particularly want to thank my co-host, Kim Mansell, for serving as with us today, and also, of course, our speaker, Mr. Hart. With that, so we're concluded. Watch for a follow-up email that contains how to get your participation certificate, and we'll have a link to the recording and a link to the slides as well. With that, we are concluded. I want to mention here, Dewayne has added a link to some of his Forbes articles, so that'd be a great resource for you. Okay, and all right, thank you everybody. And with that, we'll stop sharing and stop the session. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.